Yeah, swap sides.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Tonight's, our presentation is on,
Stand so they can see you at home.
who? Where? Where do I need to stand? Oh, let him get started then.
Sorry. Saving the mic.
And there's us.
There we are, okay. All right, we got to stand close together, then they can see us both. Okay, tonight our presentation is unveiling the mystery of collecting and propagating spring ephemerals by Patrick Maun. Spring ephemerals are the first flowers to appear in the spring for a brief and brilliant window of magic. They can be somewhat tricky to propagate. In this presentation, Patrick will go over different approaches to gathering, starting seeds, and divisions of roots. Patrick will talk about what's worked over the years for him and how you can start getting ready for the upcoming season. Patrick's background includes a master's degree in applied arts from Vienna, Austria. He's worked as a creative director, and interactive designer, and a college faculty member. His artwork finds their outlet primarily through photography, video, and video installations. He's heavily inspired by the bold contrast of light, shadow, and texture, which you will see in the photographs of his native spring ephemerals. Patrick has worked for several years propagating native spring ephemerals. He is now semi-retired and will be working this spring at Agrarian Seed Company as a native plant specialist. His hobbies include rock climber and sea kayaker, which bring him into contact with interesting ecosystems. He's also a semi-professional Irish traditional musician with a few CDs that can be found at aitait.com. There you go. Let's have a big welcome for tonight's speaker, Patrick Maun. Thank you.
All right, I have a microphone here, and I'm going to try to get my screen shared again. Let's see if I can do this. So I'm going to do share my screen. We go here, and then we hit start. Hey, look at that, it's working.
I can't see it.
Oh, I have to hit share. See, I'm not good at this
That's why we
Zoom
have a
stuff.
backup plan.
Exactly.
There we go.
There we go. All right, now we're seeing it. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Patrick Maun. I'm going to talk about spring ephemerals because it's, I think, everyone's favorites. Let's agree on that. So there's going to be a lot of photos in here, and then I love questions, so we'll have lots of time for questions at the end. So, what we're going to talk about is division, seed gathering, and questions and discussions. Pretty straightforward. So the two methods of propagating really is either by dividing things or collecting the seed and starting from seed. So first off, what's a spring ephemeral? It's kind of a vague term. If you think about flowers that emerge early in the spring before the leaf cover has filled in, generally they will come out, finish all of their growing within a few weeks and die back. I say generally because not all of them do actually die back. So there's some that aren't really spring ephemerals but get classified as spring ephemerals. An example would be columbine or wood poppy or blue cohosh, which you will actually see that the leaves of that almost throughout the season unless it's very dry. An example of a real true spring ephemeral would be the trout lily, which comes up, blooms, and dies, and there's no trace of it after it's gone. So that's a spring ephemeral. That's how I'm going to classify it, and we're going to talk about some that are true spring ephemerals and some that are kind of, they bloom in the spring. Here's some spring ephemerals, some of the common ones we see in Minnesota. So there are a lot of them, and they're all wonderful. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. So let's talk about division, propagating through division. There's a lot of reasons why we might want to do that. One, buying spring ephemerals is quite difficult. You'd be surprised at how difficult it is to find anything from that's not a Trillium grandiflora, so the large leaf Trillium. You might find some of those. They're generally sold out, or they might be $30 for one plant. You're really almost never going to find things like yellow trillium or nodding trillium. Trout lilies can be very expensive if you can find a source for them. Some are a little easier to find, like columbine or blue cohosh, but many of you just can't find. So you really, once you get some or you know someone with some, you want to look at how you can propagate those species. Division is going to be the most surefire way to get them going, and it's the quickest way to see flowers because from seed, some of these can take up to a decade before they bloom. Some even will take a couple of years before they will germinate from seed. So propagation through division is the easiest way. It's a great thing to do in your own gardens for overcrowding. A lot of these plants will grow very close together. If you've grown tulips, you know what that's like. So they actually benefit from division. So every 4 or 5 years, you can dig up the clump, spread them around, and you'll get great flowers growing everywhere. And they'll come back much stronger, which is great. I found that with trillium, with bloodroot, with marybells. If you divide them, they come back like crazy. So it's a really great thing to do. And it can help, just like I said, rejuvenate that clump that you had, and then you get a lot more. Controlling the spread. Some plants, trout lilies, for example, they get everywhere once they get going. So I am constantly moving things from one part of my woods to a different part because they'll grow in the trail, they'll get into the vegetable garden, they'll get into the lawn. So it's a great way to kind of control that spread. I have a large patch of May apples, and it kind of is migrating. So I kind of try to stop that migration of this big patch. So it's a great way to know, great thing to know how to control that. And then you can also give away some of those plants. And weak areas. You might have an area in your garden or in your woods that you want to actually move some flowers to, or some plants, or some change of the habitat there. You've lost a tree, you've gained a tree, so you might want to change how things are actually growing there. So one of the biggest things to do when you're going to start propagating is do a little bit of research. What are you dealing with? And here I've broken it down into a couple different categories. The type of plant and then the timing of when you're going to do that propagation. So we have rhizomes, which is the most common. So those are horizontal roots that grow out. It's actually a modified stem that sends down roots. We have bulbs. Trout lily is an example of that. Tubers, which you'll see on Spring Beauty or Dutchman's Breeches. Corms, which you see on something like a Jack in the Pulpit. And how you divide them is going to really be determined by what kind of root structure that plant has. For example, you can't just split a corm in half and expect it to work. It's the only way to do that really is with the seeds. So timing is also important with a lot of different plants. For example, the best time to divide a trout lily is in the fall after it's done reproducing. It's also the most difficult time to divide it because you can't find them anymore. You can divide them in the spring, which is usually what I do when they're flowering or when they're emerging. Other plants like May apples, same thing, they disappear. So I do them right when they appear in the spring. Ferns, very difficult to divide in the spring. Really easy in the fall, really easy in the spring when they're first emerging. Trillium actually will do fine if they're flowering and you divide them, they will continue to flower. So some research into that plant type can help a lot. So there isn't one good time to divide plants. People will say, oh, do it in the fall when they're dormant, but that doesn't always work out. And I think like a lot of, at least I am kind of sick of working in the garden by the fall. Everyone's got lots of energy in the spring, and that's a great time to start dividing things and still see that come up. All right, there's a purple toadshade trillium. It's gonna be a lot of flowers tonight. There's a nodding trillium. So if we look at how the trillium grows, we see we've got the, our stem, we've got the kind of rhizome mass and the roots coming off that. So I was actually lucky enough to do some division early this spring A lot of things like the large flowered trillium haven't yet emerged in Minnesota, but a few of the other species have, so I was able to actually go in. This is my patch of yellow trillium a couple weeks ago. You can see they're just coming out of the ground, and I decided I'm going to actually take a few of these and move them around. I actually divided this patch a few years back, so I just took a few of them, and you can see what they look like once you dig them up. Now, I know there's a lot of concern about jumping worms. This is a great way to actually propagate because you can dig these up, you can actually wash everything off those bare roots and then put them in some sphagnum moss or something, wood chips or anything else to kind of keep them moist, and then transfer them to somewhere else. If you're working in your own yard, it's less of a concern. I luckily do not have jumping worms yet, so I don't worry about it. But I dug this clump up, separated them, shook them apart, and then was able to move them to a different part of the yard. So trilliums are actually a really nice one to do that. The clumps can get pretty grown together, but you can kind of work them apart. If you break roots, it's not really a problem. So sometimes you have to cut them apart, but they're generally a pretty easy one to separate. Let's go to our trout lily. This is the white trout lily. We also have the yellow ones in Minnesota. They just started blooming this past week. Here's the Americanum, the American one, and you can see how they grow. Now they grow by a bulb, and what they do is once they start growing, they send out a runner that looks like a little bean sprout. It's called a stolon, and they will form a secondary bulb at the end of that by the end of the year. You'll see that in some of the photos. But when you dig those up in the spring, you won't see that secondary bulb yet. You'll just see them starting to send out those runners. So what you need to replant is the bulb, and they are fairly shallow. You can see the seed head here in number 4. That's where the seeds will actually form. But if you're picking up the bulbs, they're just like little tiny onion bulbs or something like that. So
is the seed head the little thing on the right?
yes, it's that thing there. Yeah, and I'll talk about the seeds when we get to the seeds section, but that's the seeds. They take, I think it's up to 8 years for trout lilies to actually grow by seeds. They grow very quickly from bulb division. And let's take a look. There's what they look like when you dig them up. So you can see why I say they look like bean sprouts coming off of them. And you do not need to keep those on there. If you can, when you're transplanting them, it's great. If you don't, it's fine. Another way, if you are going to collect them in the fall, I just get a really big shovel and I dig a hole in the ground, and then I just put them out in a newspaper and I just find them. They'll appear in the dirt. But the spring is kind of the easiest time to locate them because they will, once they're done flowering, they will be gone. You will not see a sign of them ever. I mean, it's very amazing. Like I said, they just started blooming. This is one of my patches right now. So when they go gangbusters once you get a patch established. So. Yes.
After you transplant, how long is it with the bulbs? How long is it until they...
So a trout lily is an interesting one. Who knows? They are very influenced by their environment. Sometimes trout lilies will not bloom because they're very happy where they are and they're fine reproducing by division. And they're like, you know what? I don't need to put flowers up. So I did a trade for some yellow trout lilies, I think 5 years ago. I have yet to see any. They may still be alive. I can't tell because the leaves look identical. So I have not seen any flowers from them yet. So it's hard to say. I think generally you get a single flower or a single leaf, then you'll get 2 leaves, and then the next year you might get the flower, something like that. If someone in the chat has a life cycle of the trout lily in their head, feel free to post that.
How far apart do you plant them and how do
You did.
Excuse me, when you have questions from the audience, they need to be repeated, otherwise the people at home.
Oh, right, yeah. So the question was how deep and how close together can you plant them? And really, you could probably just throw them on the ground and cover them with dirt. They don't need to be very deep. Probably the general rule of thumb for almost all bulbs is about twice as deep as the height of the bulb itself. So for a trout lily, that means less than an inch in the soil. And I wouldn't crowd them, but I mean, you can put them within an inch of each other. They grow pretty tightly together. But because they divide, I would actually space them out a bit so they can fill in. So if you think about it as filling in a space, that's a great way to think of them.
It look like bleeding hearts, but there's just one flower per bulb, is that the way that works?
Yeah, yeah. The question was if it's one flower per bulb. Yeah, they're really a beautiful flower. They're one of my favorites, and they don't last long, so keep an eye out for them. Next one is our friend the wild ginger. These are the flowers. These have a horizontal runner that is actually right at the surface of the soil, so you can actually see where these rhizomes are on the surface. The flowers are hidden under the leaves, and they have what are called, I'm going to butcher the name, but elaiosomes. So the seeds are covered in lipids that are attractive to ants and slugs, and you'll find this with a lot of spring ephemerals. So the seeds are actually distributed by ants and or slugs, primarily by ants, which is why they're so low to the ground. And you'll actually also find this with trillium, with wood poppy, with a lot of these other spring ephemerals. Flies might pollinate them, but with a plant like this, where it's so low to the ground, it's primarily going to be ants that are going to be in there, which is why they're so hard to see. So the easiest way to propagate wild ginger is, again, from cuttings. They're pretty easy to dig up, and they do well in the deep shade, so they're really a great ground cover. And they generally will last all summer. So that's, again, a borderline ephemeral. So the flowers are pretty ephemeral, I guess. Yeah. And this is what that structure looks like. So almost like a ginger or a turmeric or any of those other kind of, yeah. Well, it's not an actual ginger. Even though it tastes gingery and looks like ginger, it's not in the same family as the ginger. Yeah.
Where would you cut that?
So we're going to get to that in a minute. I've got some tools there. But for this one, what you want, whenever you're looking at a rhizome, you want to look for nodes on that rhizome. And the nodes are where you're going to get stems or sometimes the roots. But you're going to see over here we have kind of a node coming off. So if I was going to dig this, I would actually just take a trowel and shove it in the dirt and see what comes up, and then cut it at those different sections and then plant that. So you just want to have, you wouldn't want to have just a little chunk of this. You'd want to have one of those nodes or one of the stalks. Again, this one you would not bury very deeply, because they really like to grow kind of on the surface. Another favorite that's in full bloom right now are bloodroot. And it's the same thing. It grows by a very shallow, very thick rhizome. This one needs special mention. If you are digging this one up, wear gloves. They're called bloodroot because the rhizomes, when you cut them, have a red sap in them that will burn your hands.
It doesn't always.
But you don't want to risk it. Yes. It's the same reason I started wearing gloves when I'm pulling Virginia creeper. Apparently it can be as bad as poison ivy. It hasn't affected me yet, but knock on this wood here. Bloodroot are also one. I usually divide these right after they've bloomed, which they do not have a long bloom time. They kind of will last a few days. This rain, I'm sure, has knocked a lot of the petals off already. And again, it's the same thing here, that when we look at the structure, you get this really thick rhizome here. And what you're looking for is those nodes along the rhizome. And I usually just take garden shears or scissors and just cut them and then plant the chunks. They do not need to be very big. Less than an inch often will work. They multiply like crazy. So that's a great one to dig up and spread that around your garden.
Some questions.
Mm-hmm.
do they prefer shade or does it matter?
So the shade, so the question is if they preferred shade. And this is kind of a trick question with spring ephemerals, because while they grow in the shade, it is not actually shady when they're growing. So I actually have some in one of my front gardens that gets a lot of sun. What that means is the leaves of the bloodroot stay around most of the summer. They won't if it's very sunny. They will actually die back. But you can put a lot of these spring ephemerals in the sun because they are looking for sun, which is why they're spring ephemerals. They are taking advantage of that lack of leaf cover. If there's no canopy, they get very strong sun like we have in the spring because it's actually very strong, even though it's a little filtered from the branches. But they will actually generally do fine in the sun, just don't expect them to thrive. Yes?
With things like the trout lily that grow so close together and form these big patches and disappear, how do they play with others?
Succession plantings. The question is, this is a good one with trout lilies specifically. Others will stay around. What you do for succession planting there, they play wonderfully with others because they generally are coming up before anything else is. The only thing that's really coming up at that point that might compete with it would be something like Virginia waterleaf, but it's still pretty small at that point. In fact, if you look in any of my photos, you'll probably see Virginia waterleaf poking up somewhere. With the May apple, they might have a little bit of a problem, but probably not very much. Trillium stay to themselves for the most part. They do not spread quickly, and they grow fine with bloodroot intermingled, because my bloodroot is surrounded by trout lily. So I would say plant anything you want with them, because it won't really cause an issue. And speaking of mayapple, this is a great time to harvest mayapple when they're about this tall. They are another really nice plant that will last a little ways into the summer, but not very long. They usually kind of die back. I have a harder time finding things to plant with the mayapple. I kind of throw some ferns in there and see how they do, but generally it just ends up being not much there. I'm also been putting in some cohosh and some of the baneberry. That seems to do well with mayapple. They seem to like less competition, and I don't know if they outcompete other things or they just don't play well with others or what's going on.
I have ginger growing under.
Oh, that would be. I have ginger near it, but they have not met yet. But the mayapple's growing in the opposite direction, so they may come together at some point. There's a mayapple flower. They are hard to see. You need to get on your hands and knees to see them. They're quite big. That's about 1.5 inches across. They form a fruit. Again, ants are one of the main pollinators. I have a huge patch. I've never seen one of the fruits. Chipmunks love them. So they are a hard one to get the seeds from. Some people have better luck. They are toxic until they are very, very ripe, and then you can make jam and stuff out of them. But again, you have to find them first. But the whole plant itself is actually toxic. There is a mayapple shoot next to a trout lily shoot. And I was just going to walk through one method I use for transplanting some of these things, which is the easiest way is with a trowel. Again, you can see some Virginia waterleaf, but you'll go under. They grow off the end of a very sturdy rhizome that comes over, and you need to find out where that is. So one method is put the trowel in and then go all the way around it, and you'll find out where that rhizome is, and then you cut through it. Another way, and I use this for a lot of young seedlings, is a bulb planter. So what I will do is, there's a mayapple there on the right. I will actually take the whole plug, kind of twist it to cut through the rhizome, and then pop it out into my hand, dig the other hole where I'm moving it, and then just drop it in and take that chunk of dirt that I just pulled out and put that in the other one. So it's a great way to kind of swap those two. Also works great on ferns, because ferns, when they first come up, also have those big heavy runners, especially the ostrich ferns, and that will cut through them, and it doesn't disturb the soil around the roots, so I find it's a really nice way to transplant them. So get yourselves a bulb planter. There's some of the mayapple. So you can see it's kind of forms a J or an L with the roots coming off of that main rhizome. So those are very young. You could do them all the way up to when they're a little bigger. They're one of those shoots that emerges with the leaves wrapped tightly around the stem. This was, I think, a week and a half ago when I did these.
What is that?
Mayapple.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's hard to see. They look like a baby asparagus or something. There's some more Virginia waterleaf. It's everywhere. Here's a close-up of one. That's the mayapple. So you can see the rhizome, the roots, and then the very young mayapple. Another one this bulb planter works for is blue cohosh. There's a blue cohosh little seedling. You can tell they have the purple on them. And most likely, if you're growing an existing one, you'll have berries from the previous year's plants. So you'll be able to find that. There's a cinnamon fern or an interrupted fern. I can never tell the two apart until they're bigger. That works great with the bulb planter too. And they're just emerging right now as well. So at least in my yard, the ostrich ferns haven't appeared yet, but I'm guessing within the next 2 weeks. But the interrupted and cinnamon fern have started making an appearance.
I have one question about the fern.
Yes.
Can you go back to the last? Where would you put your bulb planter?
Around it. So the question is where I would put that. No, so ferns you don't want to divide, at least I wouldn't. You want to take the whole plant. They will mostly propagate by runners. So they will pop up. Ostrich ferns are notorious for getting in the way of where you want to be. They will appear in your trail or in the lawn or whatever, and the bulb planter is a great way to move those without disturbing the roots, and it will cut through that big runner that's under there. So you want to go around the whole plant. Until they're in their second year, they don't have that ostrich head, the brown growth from the former year, so it's really nice with the young plants, because you can see where they're coming up and you just grab it and move it somewhere else.
Pretty big for a bulb planter.
Yes, once they're by their second year, they're a little too big. There's our Actaea pachypoda. It could also be a red baneberry. I happen to know this one is a doll's eyes because they look almost the same when they're at this age. But that also works well with a bulb planter. I move them around all the time. I'm always in my woods moving things. So. Another one that works great, will also work with the trowel and is good in the spring. It's a little late now, would be the Virginia bluebells in the borage family. So. But that's what they look like when they come up. They're easy to find because they're this bright purple, but then you can move them by clump. The question?
So could you divide that clump?
Yes, this clump you could, and I probably should, and I just haven't. If you could divide this clump, yes. Yeah, this clump could probably be divided at this point, and if I was going to divide it, I would probably take the kind of outer right-hand side. I would kind of go in with a trowel and split it right there. Dig it up, loosen them up, and break it into kind of 2 clumps, and then leave one of the main ones. They will divide by seed, but they're a little slow. I have one little clump next to it. This patch here is about 10 years old, and that's how big it's gotten. So I really should divide it, I think. So let's move on to growing from seed. Growing from seed is great. It's also really hard. It's a little easier to buy seed from some of these plants, but there's some considerations if you're going to be buying seed, which I'll get into. But variety, I grow a lot of things from seed, but right now I mostly grow weird things that you just don't see around at nurseries or at plant sales. It also makes them challenging to grow, but you get a variety that you wouldn't be able to find at a nursery. So when you go to a nursery, you're going to see everything that everyone else is seeing. There are some very common ones. There are a lot of uncommon things. Like, I think twin leaf I've seen maybe once at a nursery sale, maybe at a friend's sale or something. But that's one I don't have that I would love to try to start from seed or something like that. There's a lot of really fun plants out there. Seed is a great way to start them. It's very cost effective, obviously, because seeds are cheap or free if you find plants or do seed trades. I've done many seed trades with people. and then worked on if I can get those to germinate and then thrive. You can do a lot more plants. Like I said, I don't know what the going price for a trillium plant is right now. I'm guessing $30 or something. You know, they're not cheap. And they're always sold out whenever you're trying to get them. But it's, you know, it's going to be a lot cheaper going from seed. Genetic diversity. When you're dividing things, a lot of times you're just cloning the plant and you're not going to get that diversity. For example, all my bloodroot are pink when they first come out. And that's kind of a weird little genetic trait I have in the particular ones in my woods. Educational, you learn a lot about seeds. You'll also find a lot is not known about starting many of these plants from seeds. People just don't know things. So you get to try to figure them out because there are some tricky things. Adaptability is they'll grow stronger and better generally than transplanting. Not always, but usually. Considerations, timing, strategies for gathering them. My favorite, the explosive seed collection. Ants, we talked about that a bit, and then the types of stratification. Stratification is how you get ready to plant those seeds, to break them out of their dormancy. So let's just talk. There's one that's not really a spring ephemeral, but starts blooming this spring, Jacob's Ladder, a beautiful one. And here's another, the columbine. So these last two plants and several others, they have what I like to call explosive seed dispersion. What that means is the seeds just fall out when they are ready, which can be a problem because if you want to collect them, you're not going to have a lot of luck with that. So I'm going to show some methods for collecting those later. Jacob's Ladder is a great one. Columbine, they kind of will stay in there a little bit and you can shake them out, but eventually they're just going to fall out. There's our large flowered bellwort. This one actually will form a little seed head. It's kind of a triangle, but once they dry out, the seeds will fall out. Same with the Virginia bluebells. Forms a little seed head, but the seeds will fall out. And then one of my favorites, the wood poppy. These beautiful seed heads, but they split and the seeds are gone. Also, the seeds are covered in delicious things for ants. So they're carried off. And some sedges. So an interesting thing about both the sedge and wood poppy and some others is they need what's called a double stratification. So a lot of us are familiar with a cold stratification. And what that is we take our plants, our seeds, and we mix them with a moist medium, either sand, I usually use vermiculite, or we sow them in the winter, either in a milk jug or right into the garden, and they go through a period of cold that breaks their dormancy and allows them to germinate the following spring or in a few years. These can take 12 weeks before they will break a dormancy. Of warm stratification, same with wood poppy, they need what's called a double stratification. And what that means is they need a period of, for the sedge, they need 12 weeks of warm, moist stratification. For the wood poppy, they need 90 days of moist, warm stratification, followed by a period of cold stratification. Only then will they break their dormancy and sprout. I think one reason for the warm stratification is, again, ants. The ants take the seeds, they bring them to their nests, bring them down as a food source, and then they're in the warm ground throughout the summer. Then the winter comes, the seeds are in the cold ground, they go through their cold stratification, and then they sprout the next spring. Some seeds, though, can take multiple years before they break their stratification, their dormancy. I think a great example, redwoods, they need fire to actually break their dormancy. So that's a very warm stratification, I guess. So that's where doing the research is really important. Another thing, I don't think there are any spring ephemerals that need this, but anything, especially in the legume family, will need scarification, which is where you either need to take a nick out of the seed or sand a corner of the seed. So that's another thing to keep in mind before you start the stratification, is that nicking. There's also the some of the seeds that need a host plant. None of the spring ephemerals really need that. The only one that gets close would be prairie smoke, kind of likes to have a host plant, but doesn't really need one. So that's a consideration. I don't think any of the spring ephemerals actually need one. Yes?
So my question is, when you say the scarification, is that the word you use?
Yes.
Scarification. When you purchase seeds from somewhere like Prairie Moon,
Sometimes.
have they been done or not?
Check. Some places will, some won't. So the question is if pre-purchase, so if purchase seeds are pre-scarified. They are not stratified unless they specify. So some sedge seeds might be, you'd really want to check that. Scarified, some will run them through a tumbler with a grit. I think Prairie Moon does that with some of their seeds, maybe with their Baptisia, with the false indigos. Otherwise, you know, watch TV, take out a little piece of sandpaper and sand them. But yeah, it takes a while. Partridge pea is another one. That one wants to be scarified. Any legume plant, lupin would be another one. Another one?
So these plants naturally reseed germinate.
Yes.
And obviously, nobody's there to scratch their seed code. So is it, I'm assuming it's the action of the freeze and thaw and the working into the soil of the winter that does that job for it? Or
Yes.
does that, so
A good way to think about it.
it's like a patient for a couple of years?
The question is, how does this happen in the wild? And not very often is actually would be the answer, because when you see one of these plants release a seed, how many seeds are coming out and how many plants do you see? Not many. So you take some of these plants and there are millions of seeds coming off them, and maybe less than 1% might germinate. So what we're doing is we're kind of trying to create the perfect conditions for the seeds to germinate to get a quality growth. When I grow inside instead of doing the outdoor milk jug method. I like to do things on heat pads after I stratify them. I will, unless I know that plant, I will seed heavily to hopefully get good germination until I know the plant and know how many seeds I actually need to put down. So for a little tiny starter cell, I might put down 30 seeds and hopefully see what comes out. And even in the same, like within the same genus, so if we look at like lobelia, cardinal flower and blue lobelia both put out bajillions of seeds. It seems blue lobelia seeds, you can throw them anywhere and 1 million will come up. Cardinal flower, very low germination. So who knows why, but yeah, so in nature it happens. It's just not as common. Otherwise we'd have a lot more flowers, so, or a lot more plants. Here's another one with very tiny, tiny, tiny seeds. It's the bishop's cap, which is lovely. Back to explosive, the wild geranium. They are a different kind of explosive seed. That is a geranium seed pod head, and then they explode. They are brushed by wildlife, and the seeds actually catapult out. This was my first year trying to grow geranium from seed. I have zero success. Doesn't mean it won't happen. I planted my stuff in February. And so since February, I just had, for example, cream gentian, Gentiana flavida, just germinated. That took, what is it, 12 weeks or something? So that one is very slow. Pasque flower, generally, that's about, I think, 6 to 8 weeks. These have not appeared yet, so they may not appear. We'll see.
You consider wild geraniums?
They are, I would consider them a late spring ephemeral that's not really an ephemeral. So they're one of the borderline ones. Yeah, so, and that's the thing. I think there are not many that are true ephemerals and that they completely die back. So, and there was another question.
Are you keeping
keeping them under artificial light?
Yes. So when I'm starting, the question was if I keep them under artificial light. And I actually have some pictures of what I do for the stratification. I start in with small seed cells. When I start the seeds, I put them on heat mats under artificial light, and then once they're big enough, I pot them up into a bigger pot, and then they harden off outside. In fact, I hardened mine off about 2 weeks ago, and some of them are quite large. Some are still in their starter cells waiting to get bigger. Some are very slow growing. Some are less slow growing. Some people will actually keep them in their pots for over a year and then plant them out in the second year. It develops a stronger root system. And I think the best way to do that would be to actually bury them outside or put a lot of leaves over them in the fall to protect them from a hard freeze. For some plants, that seems to actually work better. Pask would be one of those. If you put those out before the roots are too developed, they won't survive the winter. So a lot of it, again, is experimentation. The wood poppy, for example, I have been trying to grow those for 3 years from seed. They need the double stratification. This year, I started, I think, 12 plants. I've gotten 1 seed to germinate, and it's still a very tiny one. In nature, they actually do really well on their own. They will divide fine. And that tends to be from seed. So I'm just not as good as nature on that one. But again, seed is cheap, so it's really nice to experiment with it and to see what works. And if you don't have to have a ton of space for it, especially if you're doing outdoor, winter sowing in milk jugs or anything like that. It's fun to experiment to see what works and what doesn't. And a lot of times, even if you look at like Prairie Moon or something, a lot of their descriptions on some of these seeds will say, "We don't know how this works. Tell us what you get." And then here's one that's a little tricky, and there are a few like this. Pask flower, this is actually vulgaris, which is a little more robust than Patens, which is our native one, which I've also grown from seed. The seed needs to be fresh. This is the big thing. It's also with prairie smoke and a few others. You can't let the seed dry out. Now, what I've got here is organza bags. You buy these on Amazon or on Etsy in different sizes. This is what I use for almost all my plants that have explosive seeds. The seeds can't go anywhere. They go into the bag. You have to do this after they're pollinated and while they're drying out. A lot of summer plants, like our blazing stars and other things, you can actually just snip them when they're dry and leave them in a paper bag till they're dried out. But with the fresh seed, you just need to keep an eye on them. Once the wind is ready to kind of tear those seeds off, you want to cut the stem and then either stratify those seeds or plant them that year and then overwinter them in the pots. Pask flower is a great one. Very slow to germinate. I think about 12 weeks. I got some patent seeds from Julia last year, and I got a pretty good germination. It took quite a while. Those plants are doing happy at the moment. The easiest way to do these is the same with prairie smoke. Grab the whole seed off and then snip them with the scissors. They hold on harder than they do on like a milkweed, for example, how you can kind of shake those off. These kind of stick a little harder. They're a lot easier to plant when there's not a huge thing sticking out of it. Again, I will plant these pretty heavily when I'm doing them so I can get some germination, and they take a while. So the important thing is to make sure they stay moist while you're waiting for them to grow. But you want to either get them in the fridge in a moist medium, either sand or vermiculite or something, and that's what it's kind of reflecting, but I use vermiculite and I just throw all the seeds in there. That one's a butterfly milkweed. And I just toss them in a fridge in a big Ziploc bag in the back and then leave them and then plant them the next spring. So.
How much moisture?
So it's kind of tricky. If you mind, I get a little too moist sometimes, and I'll just add a little more sand or vermiculite. So what I do is I take a solo cup, one of the red plastic cups, and I will just put a little water in there and mix it with a spoon. And you want it so when you squeeze it, it holds together, but no moisture comes out. So that's the best way I can describe it, is you don't want to see any excess moisture, but you want to feel some moisture there. And just add more to it as you need it. So that's what I'll just mix up a big batch. And these are those little snack baggies that you can get. They're like half-size baggies. That's a great way to do that. It doesn't take up much space. You can reuse them. And even if you were going to not grow in your house under lights, you can then put these out in the spring, which is another good way to do it, or to share them. So I will start some, and then everything I have left over, actually mix into a big bowl with a bunch of sand and throw it out in the yard. See what comes up. Here is that the passiflora that I got last year. This is the patent. This was probably about August, because you want to wait until they bloom, and then you get them, and then you stratify them, or plant them and wait for germination, and they're fairly slow growing. But they're doing okay. Another one that's hard to start from seeds. Now I just have some flowers. Now it's going to have question time as I scroll through pretty pictures. Oh, there's a corm. I wanted to show a corm, Jack in the Pulpit. Also considered a spring ephemeral. I would not personally consider it a spring ephemeral, but that's one of those. And the trickiest, I will not answer any questions about how to propagate these because I'm very bad at growing them. That's my patch of lady slippers. And any that you buy, if they're not rescue, they are cloned. No one knows how to grow those from seed. They're so tricky. It's ants and who knows what else. I've killed a lot of them. It's a very expensive plant to kill. So this is my one patch. Another important thing, this reminded me to mention that these don't come out from under their cage. They have chicken wire around them. Last year, I took the chicken wire off for one day, and a deer ate half the flowers. So seedlings, I get, little poultry wire, tin snips, bend them together, and lawn stakes, the little U-shaped stake, and I stake them down. I move them around all the time. I do that with all my new seedlings. Pasquiflower, I had one that wasn't covered, and a rabbit, I'm assuming, ate it day before yesterday. So I just do that with flowers I like. Columbine, deer eat the columbine all the time. So I move little things around constantly to keep them protected, because if you put a lot of work into them, you hate when something eats it. So cages are a great way to cheaply keep things covered, especially for the seedlings. Once they are more established, they'll come back, but young transplants don't do as well.
Patrick,
Yes.
we have a question from
Yes.
the audience at home. When planting a new patch of flowers, is there a minimum number of plants to start with? I'm thinking of spring beauties, trout lilies, and May apples specifically.
Those, keep in mind, all of those are ephemerals and will die back, so you'd want a succession plan there. So something that's going to come up and fill that area in. Like I would really recommend the baneberries, the cohosh, things like that. They're a bit bigger and a bit slower growing. For something like a May apple, I would probably space those maybe a foot apart if you want them to fill in. The same if you're doing a wild ginger, I would take a clump and put them maybe about a foot apart and wait for them to fill in. You want to get some impact from the planting if it's an area that you're going to be seeing. Trout lily, I would pack a little tighter together. You want to get some of that cross-pollination. You want to bring the pollinators. The flies and the bumblebees just love the trout lilies. So I would pack those a little closer together. Spring beauty, I have not actually grown spring beauty or found some. That's on my list along with twin leaf and a few others to get. The Cleonica or whatever it's called. Yeah, that would be it. Yeah. So that one I would assume the same, that you want to not put those together, but you want to space them not too far apart.
So this is Julia. I have spring beauty that I planted probably 15 years ago, and it's never spread. And it's just this little tiny patch.
Like my Virginia water, or my bluebells. I have the same, earlier on I had a picture of the foam flower. I had it for about 3 years and now it's gone. The bishop's cap that I had earlier, that one, I had some, and sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. So flowers decide to die for no reason at all, just to break our hearts. Here's our large flowered trillium. Yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah, they transplant very nicely too. You'll be amazed at how quickly things will fill in once you start that. Trillium, another one that wants fresh seed, and they will also fall out when they're ready. So they turn pink and die back. At that point, I would stick a bag over them and wait for those seeds to come out, and then quickly get that somewhere. So trillium is another one. Also takes forever to flower from seed. Same with trout lily. I do not believe trout lily seeds need to be fresh. But one reason the pasque flower, the trillium, if you see seed for sale, chances are it will not germinate for you. So, because it's not fresh unless they're sending you fresh seed.
Okay, I have a question. What about some of your anemones and your rhues? Have you ever worked with those?
Yes, I do those. I've not done seed because they're so tiny and they transplant readily. Same with the Dutchman's breeches, which we had up earlier, squirrel corn. Very slow from seed, very good from division, but they're fairly small. They also all have very shallow root structures. So with those, they're a little more fragile when you are dividing them. So just kind of gently pry them apart into smaller clumps and move them. The anemones do pretty well, they're pretty robust. The Dutchman's breeches are very sensitive to their environment. They will either do great or they will die. So that's one of them.
How well do the ephemerals do under maple trees? And secondly, can you successfully plant them under a maple tree? I say that because I've got more maple tree roots in my yard than the internet has wires.
Yeah, yes, how they do under maple trees. So earlier we had a question about black walnuts. There, I don't know. I do have a black walnut tree. Black walnuts have the inhibitor in them, as do black locust and a few others that prevent growth. Maple, I have not heard that's an issue with them. I have some silver maple that are left over in my woods. I also have spruce, a lot of black cherry and oak, and everything does fine there. They're fine down by the silver maple. The true maple, our native ones, I'm not sure, but I've been in a lot of woods with maples and have seen ephemerals, so I don't think that's an issue.
Talking so much about toxins.
The roots should be fine because spring ephemerals almost all have a very shallow root structure. So you don't need to worry as much about the root depth that you would with summertime plants. Like if we think about our blue stem with its 6-foot deep root system, they need that because they're in the full sun in the summer and are drought tolerant. The spring ephemerals, they're getting their business done now. They're like, we've got rain, we've got some sun, we're happy. So they don't need to send down those huge systems of roots to get that water because they're already done for the year. So a trout lily especially, I think would do great under the maples. So the trillium, I think. Speaking of trillium, there's one of my favorites, our endangered snow trillium.
So I understand the snow trillium are I understand the snow trillium are blooming right now. Is that correct, Susan?
They were blooming about 4 days ago.
Yeah, they're right getting towards the end. They're the first, and then they're the first to die back.
Snow trillium. Have you propagated snow trillium?
I have.
And easy or
Hard.
hard?
Very slow, they want to be in a very specific area, usually oak, as they like oak. So.
In the back?
The question was, had I propagated snow trillium? And the answer is yes, and the answer is it will be hard.
Yeah, I was just thinking of all the things that make like berries, like the blue cohosh, solid seal, ginseng. Any tips on those kind of berry type of seeds?
Yes, so the question is if there are tips on berry type of seeds. The first I'll say is easiest is the Jack in the Pulpit, which is kind of a fleshy seed-like thing. I don't know if you need to wash this stuff off. I have gone to the hassle of cleaning them off. I think you probably just plug them in the ground. They're meant to go through the digestive tract. As far as the blue cohosh, I have not done them from seed. I'm sure they need a cold stratification because the berry is there all year. Again, if I was going to plant those, I would wash them off with gloves and plant them. They transplant very nicely though. So if you get one, they will move around. You'll start getting new ones and then you can move them where you want. Same with the bane berries, which also gets the berries. Mayapple has the fruit, same thing. If you can find the fruit, you want to get the seeds out. The fleshy fruits, because obviously all these are fruit really, but the berry-like fleshy ones. trying to think of another spring one that has a,
We have a question from home, or from the audience at home.
I'm just going to keep switching through these. Bishop's cap again.
Where do you get the snow trillium seeds or plants to propagate?
The plants, I did a trade with someone who was down in Ohio, and that's how I've gotten a lot of, I think I have 7 trillium species, and it was all bare root trades. So, and that's a big question, is where do I get these things? You make friends and you do trades. You call up your friend Julie and you say, hey, you've got some pasque flower, can I get some of those seeds? And that's probably the best way. Plant sales are good, rescue plants. So I know my, some of the lady slippers that I've killed, I've gotten that were rescues at the friend's sale. And usually that's because of construction projects. They're building roads and they'll know to save things like lady slippers. And so you can actually get those.
So I'm going to interrupt before we take Lori's question. So I met Patrick through the Native Plant Gardens in the Upper Midwest, which is a Facebook group. And he came to my house and got some dogwood.
And wahoo.
Oh.
Dogwood?
Oh, you also took
Yes.
a cutting of dogwood.
Yes,
but
I took.
I had an extra wahoo that
Yes.
I had. Okay, so you got a wahoo.
I was propagating from cuttings.
And then last year, we had a member-only event where Patrick was teaching us hands-on some of the things, and maybe someday we'll get to do a tour of his garden. Did you tell at the beginning about how you came to have this lovely garden?
I mentioned to a few people, but I'll tell the story. So I live in West St. Paul. Our house was built in 1957. It's a lovely mid-century modern and sits on almost an acre of land. It's a corner. And I'd say a good third of it is woods. In the 1950s, the original owner, his name was Fran Brown, was very into native plants and planted a lot of these native plants. So all the trout lilies, the trillium, the bloodroot, all of that was his doing back in the day. He also had a lot of lady slippers, which he dug up because the person who bought the house after him, he said, I don't want that son of a bitch having my lady slippers. And he lived there for 10 years after Fran and then neglected the woods and the yard and everything. He had some landscaping done from Gurdon's or wherever, and they, put in whatever. But it all, garlic mustard and buckthorn, of course, moved in. So I got the house about 12 years ago, I think, and started pulling all of those invasives. And the garlic mustard eradication took probably 3 years of just pulling it. And you can get rid of it. It just takes a while. Buckthorn, ongoing issue. I have a glossy buckthorn I've got to get out there and chop up again. They're tricky because they look like black cherry, and I have a lot of black cherry. So it's just pulling the seedlings. I was doing that the other day. There were some bigger seedlings of the buckthorn. I just get the trowel and I dig them out. I have a lot of red elderberry. I just hack those with the machete. And I just keep coming back, just hack them again because they grow like weeds. So it's some work, but that's why we do it.
Lori?
Yeah, I wondered about bayberry. And for one thing, I'm wondering if yours has come up yet. But because I transplanted from a woods that I was working on, and they seeded readily into that woods. But I'm not positive it's come back, so
Question was about baneberry and if mine is appearing. Mine is up. The cohosh and the baneberries are both up. At least 2 of them are. So I have the rubra, the red, the pachapota, the white, and the racemosa, the black. That has not come up. Actually, it just popped up. That's more of a sun-loving one. The other 2 are about 1 inch or 2 tall, and the cohosh is probably 4 or 5 inches. Basically, it looks like what the photo did earlier. It will probably come up. I mean, every climate, we have microclimates. Everyone's yard is different. My hepatica are going crazy right now, so I'm sure everyone's are. That's one of the.
One moment. We have another question from home. Do you have a question on hepatica first? Okay.
Oh, good.
Finish the hepatica.
Okay, my question about hepatica is that something that you can buy or is it?
Yes, because I bought my hepatica, one of them. The other thing with hepatica is I have no idea, this is actually a question someone asked online, what determines the color? I have the same plant is divided, one of them is a dark, dark violet and the other is white. So it's some weird thing in the soil or who knows. But yes, hepatica is one of them that you can see. Geranium is another one you'll find at plant sales. Mayapple, Jack in the Pulpit, which people really shouldn't sell because the seeds are so easy to collect. And a curse on people who sell Virginia waterleaf, which I always see at plant sales for like $6 for a single leaf of Virginia waterleaf.
So the question from home,
Yeah.
there's two of them actually. The first one's from Gabriel. Gabriel, by the way, earlier said that his blood work had already disappeared
Yeah.
for the season. So Gabriel says, late this winter, I put some sedge seeds, 4 different species, in the fridge that I'd been storing dry. Would it be better to take them out of the fridge, plant them in soil or pots, and wait for them to come up after a summer and winter?
Wow, sedge is hard. I have never managed to, I haven't really even tried sedge. I've tried some grasses, but I have not tried a lot of the sedges because their germination is really low. I tend to divide clumps. Last year I put in I keep putting in new gardens as one does. And I did a lot of sedges because I'm like, I don't have enough sedges. So I did a lot of sedges and some bulrush and some grasses, and then the deer ate them all, but they're coming back. So I would probably, if they're in the freezer, I would do both. I would spread some out. I would also put some in a pot and see if you get germination off them. So I would kind of hedge your bets and do both, because you can plant them, and one thing is you don't know if the seeds you put out are sprouting or not for quite a while, especially with sedges, because they tend to be clumping and they're going to grow in a clump when they come together. If you have them in a pot, you can actually track it, and you get to see what the small seedlings look like in their first year, which isn't always what the mature plant looks like. A sedge obviously looks like a sedge, but.
Okay, we have another question. This is from Sam Talbot. Since many spring ephemerals have these tasty
Eliasomes,
okay,
and don't quote me on the pronunciation of that, yes.
these snacks for ants, is it possible to promote ant colonies for seed dispersal in their garden?
I think that is a great question worthy of a PhD dissertation. Which ant species are doing this pollination and transportation? How deep are they bringing them in their nests? See, these are the kind of questions that, we just don't know a lot of this. I do a lot of mushrooming, and there's so many mysteries on mushrooms as well. We don't know how a lot of those, propagate, or, morels. If someone knew how to actually grow those, they're making progress, but no one really knows. So it's the same with a lot of these questions. If we could, replicate those tasty lipids, could we spread them around? And how would that work? Same with the slugs. So I don't know. That is a really good question, and one that someone should start doing their graduate studies in and get back to us.
Question, please.
I have a baby blue area to fill out. It's got quite a bit of shade. Do any of these plants that you talked about spread so much that you would deter from putting them in an open area?
She asked about in a new area with a lot of shade, if they would spread and fill. So I will give you a couple ideas. I will always say wild ginger, because it's a great ground cover. It fills in nicely and quickly. Ostrich ferns, same thing. They'll come in at the same time and shade it. You can try some of the other maidenhair fern, lady fern. Wild geranium is another, a little slower to spread, but will do really well. If you're feeling really crazy, Canada anemone. I say that because it's a frenemy. I call it my frenemy, Canada anemone. If you put it in, you're living with it forever. It's like Virginia waterleaf, but prettier. Although the flowers in Virginia waterleaf are beautiful, so we'll say that. It's very aggressive. It will beat things up. So raise your hand if you have planted something that you have regretted planting. So we all know that, and that's think long and hard before you plant Canada anemone, because, and it was an overwhelming hand raise there, so we've all done that.
Not that it's done well, but I would recommend not trying to grow wormwood and
Yes, what is that, Artemisia? Artemisia. Wormwood is actually, it is a native, and it grows everywhere in ditches, all along the road. It's very easy to recognize because it's got that sage color. It's in the sage family. It's a delightful bitter. If you harvest any of that, I've done work as a botanist for distilleries and stuff, it will be on your hands for several days, and if you lick your fingers, it is very bitter. Yeah, but no, I wouldn't plant wormwood because it's a junk plant, but it can be nice.
So we had one from Dana, and then we have another one from home. Go ahead, Dana.
There was something, and I can't remember what plant it was, maybe Virginia bluebell, about, I was thinking that it kind of clumps really well under in the soil, and I'm helping a friend with a shade slope, and there is a significant amount of creeping bellflower, and I'm wondering if that was, I can't remember what it was, would help.
So the question is,
To survive.
will any of these plants, specifically something like Virginia bluebells, outcompete creeping bellflower? No. Nothing will. Nothing will. Of course, everyone has creeping bellflower. I dig it up all the time. You have not gotten it all up. It's very pervasive. All I do is I like to feel good by pulling the flowers. I like to think that does something. Maybe a little, doesn't help. And I try to counter it by planting a lot of harebells and American bellflower, which are both natives and in the same family and look nice. So. No, the native bellflower, which is a biennial, which is interesting, so you never know where it's going to appear, is a shade-loving plant. Harebells bloom at a different time and are very tiny, so also will not compete. I don't think anything will outcompete it. It will still grow with it. If you were doing a slope, I don't think, especially one of the spring ephemerals, or even something that lasts a little longer, I don't think the roots are aggressive enough that it would do that. Maybe wild ginger, maybe.
Big leaf aster, if you start a colony and start pulling the bellflower from around.
We'll shade it out.
Big leaf aster shades out any new growth, and it actually expands its colony and fights the big leaf.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so that,
And if we have another pandemic, we should spend the time learning all of the asters.
we're going to go back to the home audience. First of all, Gabriel mentions that waterleaf is edible.
It is.
It's attractive
Yes.
to abundant bumblebees, and it's also a good nectar source for hummingbirds.
Yes, it's very mild tasting. It does not taste like spinach, like everything else. It's very mild. I do lettuce, instead of lettuce, if I'm doing a Korean barbecue, I will use the leaves. They get a little hairy when they're older. Trout lily is also edible, both the bulb and the leaf. Virginia water, bluebells are edible. A lot of these are. Trillium aren't, and some are poisonous and will kill you. Baneberry is a good one. And yet the deer will eat my baneberry. It's poisonous to them, but they will still eat them.
And then I'm just going to mention one more thing, and then we'll take one more question before we close. Gabriel again says, I had lots of germination years ago putting ivory sedge seed in a pot. Not a lot of sedge germination in the ground because most of the sedges are in soil that gets hot and dries out in the summer. I might try the seed in a shadier position and in pots. And he's the same person that you spoke with earlier.
Yes, I think that's would be a great recommendation is to do both. So I would start plugs and then also see if you can get any germination by direct sowing. But again, I think plugs will you can keep an eye on it. And they won't get shaded out by other things where you're planting them, especially if you have Virginia waterleaf.
And then there was one more question, and then we're gonna close for the evening. Did you have your?
Oh, I just wanted to say, I've had some luck smothering creeping wallflower with cardboard compost mulch. I don't think I know it didn't get everything, but I weeded it and then smothered the heck out of it, and then kept watching for more popping up, and it worked pretty good.
When you say weeded, you dig it, did you dig it up or?
Yeah, I dug it up, and then smothered it. 2 to 3, and I'm going back to that garden to check on it.
2 to 3 years.
That it kept it under control.
And,
Possibly longer.
and now it's all Canada goldenrod.
You have to ask for sure.
So is this your last picture?
Yes, that's my last one. In fact, it goes to, thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Patrick.
Yeah,
It has been an absolute joy having you here. I've learned from you, and I think that this is going to be a topic and a presentation that I hope the recording is good, because I'm going to go back and listen to those tips again. You just gave us an incredible amount of information. I didn't see anyone sign up for either May 21st or April 21st. Please don't leave me alone. I'll be so lonely. Anyway, so please remember to sign up or to go online to the website and find the volunteer page to go to Sign Up Genius. There'll be another opportunity and an email coming up because we do have to fill all those spots. Are there any other announcements?